Even though most people are not super wealthy, many of us do have an idea of what it would be like to live that lifestyle. We watch shows about the secret lives of the super rich, we follow them on social media, and we even read their autobiographies. But that awareness we have for how the rich live does not really happen in the other direction. Even though many of us have most likely described ourselves as being broke at some point, not many people know what it's like to live in poverty. And it's when you get to a point that everyday things that many of us don't think twice about becomes a major challenge for those who are living in poverty. And the first example of this has to do with banks, because for many of us, things like a checking account, ATMs, and personal checks are some basic financial services that we use on a daily basis. And it might seem hard to imagine what it would be like without access to services like this, but for many people, that is their reality. So as you may know, the main way banks make their money is by taking the money customers deposit into their accounts and using it to make loans to other customers, and this can be for things like a car loan, student loans, or credit cards. And whenever you borrow money, that money has an interest rate tied to it, and that is the price you pay for borrowing that money. This means that the money made on these loans is revenue for the bank. And yes, some of that money is given back to customers in the form of interest on their money, but most of the money that is made is kept by the bank as revenue. However, this only works when people have money in their accounts, because the bank cannot issue loans if they do not have any money to work with in the first place. And because a major part of the bank's revenue comes from the interest people pay on loans, the business will not work without this component. And this is why you see banks require that you have a minimum amount of money in your account. But this is where the problem is for people who are barely getting by, because most of these people cannot afford to keep the daily balance that is required to waive the service fees. So for example, if you wanted to get a basic checking account from Chase without having to pay a service fee, then you would have to maintain a daily balance of $1,500 in your checking account, have an average beginning balance of $5,000 in one or more Chase accounts, or have direct deposits of more than $500. And if you meet at least one of these requirements, then your service fee is waived. But like I said, many people living in poverty cannot meet this requirement, and that's when they will end up paying service fees. And even though a $10 or $20 service fee might not sound like the end of the world to you and I, for someone who is barely making enough to get by, a $10 or $20 service fee could be the difference between having enough to feed their family or not. So now, someone who is not living in poverty and could afford to pay a service fee is not paying anything for these financial services. Meanwhile, a person who is living in poverty and cannot afford to pay the service fee is the one who ends up having to pay a service fee. Now, the second reason why being poor is more expensive is because people are more likely to fall victim to predatory businesses, and a great example of this is payday lenders. And for those who don't know what payday lenders are, they issue loans which are known as payday loans, and these are short-term, unsecured loans, and normally the amount of the loan is on the smaller side, with an average loan amount of less than $500. And the way these loans work is someone is issued a payday loan and they must repay the loan on their next payday. And so far, these loans do not seem like something bad, but where it gets bad is when you consider the fact that payday loans have interest rates that are in the hundreds. For example, if you were to get a payday loan for $500 for 14 days in Texas, you would end up paying about $100 in fees, and when you convert that into an annual percentage rate, it comes out to well over 500%. Now yes, some states do have limits on how much payday lenders can charge, and one example is Florida. But even then, if you were to borrow the same $500 for 14 days, the APR on that loan is still a whopping 286%. I mean, everyone talks about how bad credit card debt is because they charge anywhere from 14 to 25% APR. So can you imagine being stuck with debt where the APR is 200, 300, or 500%? Now you may be thinking, why doesn't someone just go and get a credit card and use that instead of payday loans? And the answer is because many of these poor people do not have any credit to begin with, or they may have some credit but it's not high enough to qualify for credit cards. Plus, many people have such low incomes that they don't meet the income requirements of credit card companies, so they have no choice but to use payday loans. But that's not the only thing that makes payday loans bad, because when someone gets a payday loan, they will typically write a check for the loan amount plus the fees, and on the day of maturity, they are expected to return to the store and pay back the loan. And if they don't, then the lender will redeem the check. However, the problem here is that if the person who borrowed the money does not have enough money in their account, then they could be charged a fee for the bounced check. Plus, now they could be charged a late fee by the lender. And for someone who is barely getting by, every dollar more they have to pay in fees puts more stress on them, and for many people, those extra few dollars can be the difference between having food on the table and not. However, nowadays, people can just go online and complete the application process there. And if approved, the payday lender will simply transfer the money into their account with the banking information they provided on their application. and when it comes time to pay the loan back, the lender will electronically withdraw the loan amount plus the fees from the customer's account. Now this is more convenient, however the problem with this is that when the lender withdraws their money, they could be leaving the person who brought the money with a low account balance, and if they make any other charges to that account, they could be hit with overdraft fees from their bank. Then other times, after they have paid the loan and fees back, some of these people don't have enough to pay rent, pay their utilities, and cover all of their other basic expenses. And when the only two options are to get evicted or get another payday loan, most people will get another payday loan, and this is when they get trapped in a cycle of using payday loans often. And once they begin that cycle, it can be very difficult to get out of it. Now the third reason why being poor is more expensive has to do with interest rates, and this is because the interest you are given on things like a car loan, a mortgage, or a credit card is based on things like income, credit score, and assets. So someone who has a low income, little to no assets, and a lower credit score is going to be seen as a higher risk to lenders than someone who has a high income, has assets, and has a good credit score. And therefore, poor people will almost always end up with higher interest rates, and at the end of the day, that means anything they finance will cost them more, which again means they end up with less money in their pocket. Then people with low income and bad credit history do not get to benefit from sign-up bonuses, cash back, and all the other benefits some credit cards offer, and that is because those credit cards will have more strict requirements for who they accept. So now poor people get stuck with higher interest rates, and at the same time they don't get any of the benefits that some credit cards offer. And this is assuming they can even qualify for any credit cards, because many don't qualify, and those who don't have no choice but to use payday lenders, and we already went over why payday loans are terrible. The next reason why being poor is more expensive has to do with how people on a low income make shopping decisions. For example, when an average person is doing their shopping, they're going to be looking for how they can get the best deals, and when it comes to shopping for groceries or other household items, many times the best deals happen when you buy in bulk. For example, you might be able to get a better deal when you buy 3 boxes of cereal at the same time versus just one. So when we're talking about someone who earns a high income or even an average income, they can't afford to buy things in bulk. And even though it is costing them more upfront, it's actually saving them money in the long term. But for someone who is on a low income, they are limited by the amount they have to spend on each trip to the grocery store. So that means they cannot afford to buy items in bulk, even if it does save them money in the long term. And this is not just limited to buying things in bulk at the grocery store, because it also applies in many other areas. For example, let's say your car needs new tires. A person on a low income is going to search for the cheapest option they can find, and that is most likely going to be buying used tires. And let's say the used tires are half the price of the new tires, which is good for that person because they can save money up front. However, the problem is the used tires only have about 25% tread left on them, and that is when saving money up front by buying used tires will cost more in the long term. Now, if you were able to find used tires that have 50% tread and they are 50% less than the price of new tires, then there wouldn't be any difference between buying new tires and buying used tires, but that is rarely the case. So even though it may seem like poor people are saving money because they pay a lower amount at the register, that's not really the case when you look at the big picture. Now the next reason why being poor is more expensive is because everything costs more as a percentage of your income. For example, earlier I mentioned service fees, so if you have someone who is making $300 per week and they are hit with a $35 service fee or an overdraft fee, then that is 12% of their weekly income that just went to pay for that fee. Now compare that to someone making $3,000 per week. That same $35 service fee only makes up about 1% of their weekly income. And then if the person who is on a low income is also hit with a late fee or another type of fee, then they are using a bigger percentage of their income just to cover the fees when compared to someone on a high or even an average income. Then whenever someone is looking to rent an apartment or a house, most landlords will require a security deposit plus the rent for the first month, and for many people who are barely getting by, they cannot afford this, so once again they have to find alternatives which don't necessarily benefit them in the long term. Then we also have to consider the fact that time is money, and for someone who is struggling financially, simple activities that we do without thinking can really take up large amounts of time for those who are living in poverty. For example, someone living in poverty might not have a car, so that means they have to take the bus to work, which means waiting at bus stops and having a longer commute to work. Or if they need to go to the grocery store, laundromat, or anywhere else, they must get to where they are going by either walking or using public transportation. And at the end of the day, this is time that is being wasted and that would be better used working overtime, taking care of their family, or working on a way to get out of poverty. Plus, you also have to consider inflation, and yes, inflation does impact everyone, but the impact of inflation on poor people is many times more than the average person. And this is because poor people typically work jobs that pay the minimum wage, and these jobs rarely increase their pay to keep up with inflation. So now you have someone who has been making the same income for the past several years, and in that time the cost of housing has gone up, the cost of transportation has gone up, the cost of medical care has gone up, and the overall cost of living is higher today than it was years ago. But at the same time, these people's wages have not gone up whatsoever, and if they have gone up, chances are it hasn't kept up with inflation. So now every year it becomes an even bigger struggle to stay ahead financially and get out of poverty. So with that being said, those are some reasons why it's more expensive to be poor, and of course, being poor is not something that is impossible to escape. So if you are someone who is struggling financially, take the time to become educated on personal finance and put in the work to do whatever you have to do to get out of the place you're currently in and get to the place you would like to be. And that's going to do it for this video. If you enjoyed watching or you found any of this information helpful, it would really help if you like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.